Hey there. Ready to dive deep into Hurricane Milton with us? We've got a whole stack of your sources here. And let me tell you, it's not just another hurricane story.
No, not at
This
all.
goes way beyond wind and rain.
Right.
We're talking government response, the long-term economic fallout,
Right.
and honestly, the mental toughness it takes to rebuild after a disaster of this scale.
It's incredible, yeah, the resilience. And it's fascinating to see how this event, this hurricane, kind of connects to these broader issues, you know? We're
Sure.
talking climate change, the fragility of our food systems, even immigration policy. It's all intertwined.
It is. It's a lot to unpack, so let's break it down. Okay, so picture this. October 9th, Hurricane Milton, a Category 3 storm, slams into Siesta Key, Florida. And we're not just talking a breezy day at the beach here. We're talking 3.3 million homes and businesses, poof, plunged into darkness at the peak of the storm. Can you imagine? The scramble for generators, the sweltering heat. I mean, it's a recipe for chaos.
Oh, absolutely. And you have to remember the context, right? This is Florida we're talking about. They've been hit hard these past few years. Helene, Idalia, Debbie, none of those were a walk in the park.
Not at all.
So Milton, this is another punch in the gut for a state that's still reeling from the last few punches.
Yeah, like they haven't even had a chance to catch their breath. So how is the recovery effort going? We've got FEMA on the ground, disasterassistance.gov is up and running, and the SBA is offering those low-interest loans. It seems like they're even trying to streamline things like food assistance and prescription refills.
Yeah, it does seem like they've maybe learned a thing or two from past storms, which is encouraging. What I find really interesting here is how proactive they're being this time. They're already talking about the long-term impacts on agriculture, like
Wow.
even down to the potential for tree mortality.
Tree mortality. Wow. See, I hadn't even considered that. What are the long-term implications of something like that?
Well, for starters, the estimated damage to Florida's agriculture from Hurricane Milton, it's a gut punch, potentially reaching up to $2.5 billion. Now, to put that in perspective, that's equivalent to the agricultural damage from Hurricanes Helene, Idalia, and Debbie combined. And a huge chunk of that damage is going to be to citrus crops, Florida citrus groves, directly in Milton's path. And we're talking potential long-term impacts here. We're talking fruit drop, damaged branches, flooding, all of which can lead to, you guessed it, tree mortality, which, as you can imagine, has a ripple effect for years to come.
So instead of just seeing a temporary spike in, say, orange juice prices, we could be looking at, what, a 20% increase, maybe more by next year, and potentially even shortages of certain crops down the line.
Exactly. And it's not just oranges we have to think about.
Yeah.
Think about the dairy and cattle farms that were hit. A lot of them suffered significant damage to their infrastructure. Power outages mean disruptions to milking, processing, refrigeration, all of which can lead to spoiled products and lost income. This storm, it's disrupted the entire agricultural cycle in a way that'll take years to fully recover from.
Wow. And it's easy to get caught up in the economics of it all, but I was reading about the crisis cleanup hotline. People can call and get help with things like tarping roofs and clearing trees. It's those practical things, the things that can feel completely overwhelming after you've just gone through something so traumatic.
Absolutely. It's so easy to feel paralyzed by the sheer scale of the damage. That's why these hands-on support systems are so essential. It's about giving people a sense of agency, a feeling that they can actually take those first steps toward rebuilding.
It's about giving them hope. And, one thing that really struck me was the emphasis on mental health resources in the wake of this storm. It seems like there's a growing awareness of those invisible scars that disasters can leave behind.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's about time, honestly. The Disaster Distress Helpline, for instance, that's a 24/7 lifeline for people struggling to cope with the emotional fallout, the trauma, the anxiety, the grief. These are all very real consequences. And it's crucial that we provide support for people's mental well-being right alongside those physical rebuilding efforts.
I couldn't agree more, because ultimately it's not just about rebuilding homes and businesses, is it? It's about rebuilding lives.
You're absolutely right. It really is about addressing the human cost.
Yeah.
And that goes way beyond just the dollar amount. And speaking of human cost, we can't ignore the fact that Hurricane Milton tragically took lives, at least 17 that we know of at this point.
It's heartbreaking. 17 families grieving and countless others who will forever be marked by this tragedy. It's just a stark reminder that behind all the statistics and the economic analyses, these are real people.
Yeah.
Real people whose lives have been irrevocably changed.
It's true, and that's where those mental health resources and that community support,
Yeah.
that's where it becomes absolutely vital. Being there for each other, not just in those immediate days after a storm, but in the weeks, the months, even years that it takes to heal and to rebuild.
Yeah, because the emotional aftershocks, they can last a lot longer than the physical damage. And speaking of rebuilding, the Biden administration has allocated a lot of money, over $1.8 billion for recovery efforts for both Hurricanes Helene and Milton. So that's a significant investment, but as you said earlier, it's spread across multiple disasters and it's a long road to recovery.
It really is. And while that financial aid is crucial, and it is, it's important to remember that money alone can't solve everything.
Mhm.
You can't underestimate that human element. The volunteers who are out there working tirelessly to clear the debris, the neighbors, helping neighbors, the first responders who are putting their lives on the line. These acts of compassion, of solidarity, it's what truly brings a community together in the face of something like this.
It's about rediscovering that sense of shared humanity in the middle of all the chaos. And speaking of coming together, I was struck by the reports about the decision to suspend, at least temporarily, ICE and CBP enforcement activity
Oh, right, yeah.
at evacuation shelters and aid distribution points, which, on the surface seems like a small act, but it really speaks volumes when you think about it.
It does. It really does. And this whole decision to even temporarily suspend ICE enforcement, I
Hmm.
mean, it's surprisingly progressive when you think about it. And it really raises some important questions about how immigration policy and disaster response, how those two things intersect. Because on one hand, you have this very immediate need to make sure that everyone, and I mean everyone, regardless of immigration status, that they feel safe, that they feel secure, going to seek help, getting those resources that they need during an emergency. But on the other hand, it does highlight the complexities, maybe even the contradictory nature of our immigration policies, especially in times of crisis.
It forces us to examine, maybe re-examine our values as a society. I mean, do we prioritize bureaucratic rules or basic human compassion, especially when we're talking about a crisis that doesn't discriminate? That's a question we should all be asking ourselves.
It really is. It's about, are we going to be there for one another as human beings? It speaks to the need for a more nuanced approach to immigration, a more humane approach, one that recognizes the shared humanity of all of us, especially during a crisis.
Yeah, it's about understanding that disasters, they don't discriminate, and our response to them shouldn't either. And speaking of response, the folks over at USA.gov have really stepped up. They've put together so much information about everything: filing insurance claims, finding missing loved ones, navigating FEMA assistance. There are even resources specifically for military personnel and veterans. It's like a one-stop shop for everything related to disaster recovery.
It's really impressive, and I think it highlights the way the government's approach to disaster response is evolving. They're recognizing that clear, accessible information is often the first and most important line of defense in these situations. Having a centralized place like USA.gov, where people can go, they can find accurate, up-to-date information, and it's tailored to what they need, it can be really empowering, especially in those chaotic first few days and weeks after something like this happens.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power, especially when you're feeling overwhelmed and unsure of where to even begin. And it's not just the federal government. I was reading that the USDA is making temporary changes to food programs
Oh, wow, okay.
in response to Hurricane Milton to try and give, for example, schools more flexibility with meal services, to try and provide some guidance on food safety after a disaster, things like that.
That's essential. We need that.
Hmm.
Because it's about adapting to the situation, recognizing that the usual rules and regulations, they might not work in the aftermath of a disaster. Food security is so important, and these adjustments that the USDA are making, it shows that they get it. They're recognizing the real challenges these communities are facing as they try to get back on their feet.
And it's not just about those immediate needs, right? The USDA is also offering some assistance to agricultural producers, rural communities, to help mitigate those long-term economic impacts that we were talking about before.
It's a step in the right direction for sure, and it's encouraging to see that the response to the hurricane, to Milton, it's extending beyond just those immediate relief efforts. People are starting to address those more complex, multifaceted challenges of rebuilding and recovery, looking at this in a more holistic and sustainable way.
It's about recognizing that true recovery, it's more than just bricks and mortar. It's about rebuilding lives, communities, livelihoods. It's about doing it in a way that fosters resilience and prepares us all for the next challenge, whatever that may be.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. It's about understanding that these events, as devastating as they are, they can also be catalysts for positive change.
Mm.
They make us stronger. They force us to reassess our priorities, rebuild, and ultimately create more resilient communities.
It's about turning those challenges into opportunities. And it seems like right alongside the government agencies, the big organizations, we're also seeing this groundswell of support from community initiatives too.
Oh, absolutely. Local groups, faith-based organizations, those volunteer networks, they're all coming together, mobilizing to try and provide these essential services. Everything from debris cleanup and food distribution to like temporary housing, childcare. I mean, it's incredible. It's humanity at its best, right? It's people coming together to be there for their neighbors who need it most.
It's that sense of community that's what makes all the difference. And it's not just about the practical help, right? It's about offering someone a shoulder to cry on, a listening ear, just that feeling that you're not alone, that you've got shared experience, that kind of emotional support that's just as vital to rebuilding as any government program or financial aid package.
You're so right. It's about fostering a sense of belonging, a shared purpose, just reminding each other that we're not alone in this, that together we can get through anything.
We can overcome any obstacle. It's about rediscovering that sense of hope for the future. And, I think after a disaster of this scale, this magnitude, it's really easy to feel overwhelmed, maybe even helpless. But then you see these images, these stories of neighbors helping neighbors, of these volunteers working tirelessly to rebuild. And it's just this powerful reminder that even in the darkest of times, there's always light, there's always resilience, there's always that incredible, that indomitable human spirit, shining through.
That's beautifully said. And it really does. It leaves us with a lot to think about, doesn't it? Not just like the immediate impact of Hurricane Milton, but these deeper, more philosophical, I guess, questions about how prepared we are for the future, for the next disaster, our responsibility to one another, and our capacity for compassion, for collective action.
It's a reminder, a stark reminder, that these events, they're devastating, but they can also be like a wake-up call. A catalyst to create something better. It's really up to us, all of us, to pay attention, to really learn from these experiences and to try to build a better future for everyone, one that's more resilient, more equitable for everyone.
Well said. A future where we're better prepared, not just in terms of, infrastructure, having the resources, but also in our capacity for empathy, for solidarity, just that unwavering support for each other.
This deep dive has definitely given us all a lot to think about. From that, that immediate aftermath to this long road to recovery that we know lies ahead. Hurricane Milton is a powerful reminder, a stark reminder of just how powerful nature can be, but also of the enduring strength of the human spirit.
It really is. And it leaves us with this question. How can we each, in our own way, contribute to building a future where communities are better equipped, not just to weather the storms, the literal storms, but the metaphorical ones as well? It's definitely something we're thinking about.